Hello and welcome to this week's LLG vlog. I'm Deborah Evans, Chief Executive of LLG, and joining me today we have...
Helen McGrath, Head of Public Affairs.
So what are we going to talk about today, Helen? What's top of your list?
Climate change, Deborah. I want to get back to climate change. I think when COVID hit and maybe people had a bit more time to really stop and think about climate change, there was this sort of galvanized approach and a lot of interest in the sector. And to be frank, what we've seen is less of an interest as we move forward in relation to all these crises the sector are now, it almost seems daily facing. So we really need to get back to looking at climate change and trying to engage the membership in participating in events and conferences to flesh out what local government can do, what the public sector can do to address this. But meanwhile, there are a group of 6 children and young adults in Portugal who have taken action against Portugal and 32 other countries in respect of their failure to meet targets under the Paris Agreement. This is greenhouse gas emissions. So it's the first of its kind. It's been issued in the European Court of Human Rights. And it's basically brought on the basis that their fundamental freedoms, their fundamental rights to life, privacy, family, and also to be free from discrimination have been violated due to the lack of action of these 32 countries. Now, in response, the various governments have tried to say that this is outside the jurisdiction of the European Court of Human Rights, and that actually that there is no evidence in existence at the moment to demonstrate that climate change poses an imminent risk to human life. Now, it will be interesting to see how the court approaches that in relation to what we've seen this summer with devastating wildfires and suffocating heat waves. But quite how they'll approach that remains to be seen. But what I will say is that the court has already rejected defendant government's motions to remove the fast tracking of the case and actually just hear arguments at first instance on the admissibility, the jurisdiction of this case. So for those who want to follow it, I'm going to have to double check the name here. It is Duarte, Agostinho and others against Portugal and 32 other states. So we'll be following that as that case continues.
Well, that is very impressive, really, that they're actually taking action. And the important thing for you to remember out there as lawyers is that climate change can actually be that green thread that runs through everything that you do, whether you're doing a project, a contract, a planning application, whatever it may be. You can think about this all of the time. It's really important for your local plans, your strategy, that it's embedded, and that there's been quite a lot of unpicking of green goals recently. We've seen drilling announced again in the North Sea. We've seen the lifting of the nutrient neutrality rules. But don't let it go within your local authority. Let's serve the community properly and put climate change at the top of the agenda. So from one problem to another, how else do you solve problems in your local authority? Now, one of the things that's emerged recently that you're probably quite interested in, either that or terrified, is artificial intelligence and its use within local authorities. Now, that might be within, for example, waste collection. It might be something to do with repairing potholes. It could be the use of machine translation in some of the cases perhaps that you're considering doing. There's all sorts of uses for AI within a local authority, and it won't be long, I tell you now, before it takes its seat in the legal department. And our aim is really that it doesn't replace lawyers, but it serves lawyers, and it frees some of that administrative burden from them, enabling you to do your job more effectively. Now, if this is something you'd like to learn more about, we've done a fabulous briefing note on this, and we're also covering it at the governance conference, and we've got real practical insight from Swindon Council as well as to what they're doing in their local authority, and getting to grips with the ethics of it as well as the delivery of it. So fascinating, trust me. So on the topic of problems, we always have a list for you. What's next on your agenda then, Helen, from a problem perspective?
Well, it's not my problem, but it's certainly the LGA's problem. I'm sitting here with a copy of the recent MJ edition, and it's running with the title as LGA Chief Under Threat. Now, this is the story, and it's based on sources that we're not quite sure where those sources have originated from, but sources nevertheless that talk about the future of the Chief Executive, Mark Lloyd, being under threat, being in the balance as the new Labour-led regime considers a raft of changes. Now, this is a story that's going to unsettle the LGA, I imagine. And really, it's about whether or not, given the change of political leadership and in the run up to what surely must be the general election next year. In fact, it will be the general election next year, won't it, at some point, about whether or not the LGA wants a different type of leader and a new beginning, essentially. This could be tricky for the LGA because the article reports Councillor Davis is standing as the parliamentary candidate for the Telford constituency, and if he's elected to Westminster, he's going to step down. And what I didn't know was that in the senior management team, the deputy chief executive works part-time 3 days a week, while their director of policy, Ian Hughes, who we know well, is due to retire early next year. So critics are saying that that's going to cause a massive gap in the stability of the leadership team if Mark Lloyd does go. But it's one to watch and potentially not very nice for him to see either on the front cover. For the world
I think that would be extremely unsettling to see your own job being discussed on the front cover of a magazine. But there we go.
Where we go indeed. So we will have to see. Incidentally, on the point of retirement, I note that Tipfir's CEO Rob Whiteman is retiring next year as well.
Really?
So that's another person. Yes, that's another person that we've had a really great long-standing relationship with, and a whole history of working in the sector stepping down. Now, before I move back to you, Deborah, I also want to say that in the wake of Birmingham's equal pay claim, listeners might not be aware, viewers might not be aware, that Sheffield is now facing a huge equal pay claim brought by the trade union GMB, basically on the position they say that their job evaluation scheme, that Sheffield's job evaluation scheme is, quote, rotten and discriminates against women in female-dominated roles, and roles such as cleaners, care managers and teaching assistants. And in the case of teaching assistants, they're saying that they could have been underpaid by as much as £11,000 per year. So this is a huge threat to the council, I imagine, in terms of their financial stability, and one we need to keep a really big eye on. And we've said it before. We said it when we were discussing Birmingham, that really, excuse me, councils need to look at their job evaluation schemes and make sure everything is recorded and assessed the way it should be.
So whilst equal pay claims is looking backwards, we also like to look forwards from the point of view of sustainability of the workforce. And we've expressed a real interest in the SQE, the Solicitors Qualifying Exam, that's run by the SRA, that's the new way to become a lawyer. Now, earlier in the year, there was a lot of discussion in the press because the exam basically failed its EDI criteria. People weren't doing very well if they were neurodiverse. It's a huge multiple choice exam that goes on for hours. Also, there was a real discrepancy of results across a number of ethnic minorities that really didn't make sense. So they've got universities looking into all of that. Additionally, the pass rate was very low and a number of potentially really good solicitors weren't getting through the exam. But for us, there's a bigger issue really, and that's about making the exam and the resulting solicitor fit for purpose to work in law in local government. So for us, it's about building some modules that really fill the gaps. So we're looking to develop specific modules on our nationally lead areas such as procurement, planning, licensing, adult social care, etc., etc., to really give our trainees the best start in life in local government. And we'll be building some modules that do practical skills as well, things that they won't get elsewhere. For example, an introduction to political awareness, real key skills if you're working in local government. So we're looking really to fill the gap, and we're going to work alongside the SRA to make sure that this exam is really relevant and useful for our trainees of the future. So that's what I have to say with respect to that. I've been really honoured to talk to you today, as I'm sure Helen has as well, and we hope you've enjoyed this particular podcast. Thank you very much.
Thank you.